Hello and welcome to the Patron Saints of Pop Culture podcast. As always, I am your co-saint, Miguel Covarrubias.
And I am Kathy Covarrubias. And today, let's talk about the 2017 movie, It.
So, spoiler alert if you have not yet seen that, but you've also had plenty of time to either read the book or watch the mini-series. I think it was MTV that put it out with Tim Curry.
You're asking the wrong person. I didn't have such fancy fandangled things as a kid, like MTV.
Okay. But Tim Curry, yeah, fantastic. So I'm sure that a lot of people either grew up with having seen that or having an older sibling that did and tried to protect you from seeing it, even though you probably watched bits and pieces in the background and scared your rear end off for the rest of your life.
Yep. Or if you're like me, your older siblings were, yes, very into Stephen King and thus had It novel and the movie around the house, and you tried desperately to avoid even taking a peek at it because it scared you so much, even though you had no idea what it was about, but still just the image of
Pennywise?
Yeah, Pennywise just like threw you over the edge.
So, summary for this movie is the first part of that novel is the children against Pennywise the Clown in Derry, Maine. Yeah, I guess that's my summary.
All right. A group of misfit kids get together when they discover that they all have experienced some strange happenings around town. They all soon discover... Oh, now you're laughing at me. I was trying to be all dramatic and cool, and now you're making fun of me. They all get together, and they band together to defeat what they call It.
So...
It was going to be awesome, and then he started laughing at me, so whatever.
Well, I'm sorry. For my review for this movie, I felt like it was pretty good. It did pretty much terrify me. So, I mean, I was already terrified of clowns and Tim Curry's Pennywise, but Bill Skarsgård's Pennywise was much more terrifying and menacing. And so it was, yeah, it scared me. So
Yes.
I don't know if I would give a blessing to something that scared me.
That's a good point. I also was or am terrified of the movie. I still get the creeps just thinking about the woman in the background in the library scene, just staring at him, as he's looking at the book. That just that's one of my I think that is one of my fears actually, is just not realizing somebody is staring at you and then turning around and just seeing somebody sinister smile just staring back at you just really creeps me out.
And I have to say that, mine has always been sort of like that and has that low-key, feeling that somebody's behind me at times and moments, and we'll talk about that here in just
I think that's it's kind of like a primal instinct that humans have, though, is this other sense that something is watching you, which is completely useless at this point in time in our evolution, but
yeah.
But it has helped us in the past when we were hunters and gatherers, so it's just kind of one of those things that's still hanging around, but it still causes a lot of fear.
Well, and the thing is about where we do the show from, we have a corner of our attic, which is we put kind of drapes up around it to kind of insulate the sound, to kind of make it not as loud and echoey as the rest of the house. And so it's kind of cut off from the rest of the room a little bit. And so, right now, I have this fear there's somebody behind the curtain.
No, I know. There's this little hole between, because there's two pieces of cloth essentially hanging down, and there's a hole in between it. And Abigail's avoiding looking at that spot. But yeah, I have this fear that I'm going to turn around and there's just going to be a face there.
Yeah.
So thanks, It, for
Yeah.
causing childhood terrifying memories to...
Pennywise is going to be like right there.
Stop,
Bill
Miguel.
Skarsgård is going to
I
be in
can't even, like... I'm just going to keep... I'm always cold, so I'm wrapped up in a blanket right now, and I'm just going to pop up the blanket just a little bit so I can avoid looking behind me.
Well, obviously, this is broken up into two parts, and I do appreciate some of Stephen King's writing. I love the Dark Tower series. I love how like the characters were just so very vibrant and real in the series, and how the main character of Roland's journey from being this kind of gruff, like loner guy, and how he became that, but also his journey out from there to become more of a father figure towards the end of the whole series. And I've never read it. I've never had a desire to read it. I've heard that there are some things that I don't think would translate very well to 2018 movie, but his themes of childhood fears are very, I think, timeless. Mm-hmm. And I think this is something that makes this movie a good adaptation. The miniseries was a fantastic adaptation in and of itself. I'm sure there's probably been some other people who've been trying to do something like this, but have not succeeded.
Yeah. Do you want to do a recap of the kids' fears just to kind of show how like universal they are?
Well, you have. We didn't write down the kids' names.
No. Okay. Well, we can just go over the different fears.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have fear of what was his name? Billy, his brother's disappearance, and kind of his own responsibility for that.
Yeah.
And that he was to blame for his brother's disappearance, and kind of growing up without his brother, and always kind of being, well, sort of overlooked because his parents are so distraught with grief over the loss of his brother.
Well, and also, too, I mean, he is afraid of what happened to him, which is why throughout a big portion of the movie, he refused to acknowledge that he actually died.
Yeah. You have Mike and his fear of losing his parents, and, well, he did lose his parents, but also of, the racial tension and basically how people are going to see him, how people are going to treat him, and, not becoming desensitized like his, I guess it's his uncle or his grandfather on the farm.
Some kind of relative, yeah. Well, and also, too, I think he's also scared because he feels partly responsible for his parents' death, because he remembers them calling out to him to save them, but he couldn't. Yeah. And I mean, that is a real, I think, universal fear. Like, what if you see somebody who you could not save? There's just no way that you could not save them.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously the fear of clowns, and you have Beverly with her fear of growing up, and also her sexual trauma there that with her father and
creepy drugstore man,
and I mean, it's just the rumors about her and everything else, and
which I had rumors like that about me growing up too. And it was just because I just happened to reach puberty before a lot of the other people in my class. I'm pretty sure I was the first girl in my first girl in my class to get her period. I definitely had a chest before most everybody in my class too. And so I remember there was a rumor going around that I stuffed, and I had to ask somebody what do you mean? I don't understand. What do you mean? What does that mean that I stuff? Yeah. I don't even know. That's still how innocent thinking I had. So I can kind of relate to Beverly in that. I had rumors like that going around, and it was just because that I just happened to hit puberty before everybody else.
You also have the hypochondria, the fear of getting sick, and the fear of anything dirty. the fear of letting down your parents,
Yep.
and it's just so many childhood fears that are almost universal for all of us. I mean, they're all things, and I mean, I saw myself a lot in some of those things, but it was mainly in New Kids, and I can't remember his name.
Here, Ben, maybe?
Sure.
Here, I can look it up.
Yes,
real
it
quick.
is Ben, because I remember, because that's my middle name, and I resonated a lot with him because even though, I wasn't really the new kid in the place that I grew up, but, I was always the larger kid. I was always the smart kid who would much rather prefer to have my nose in a book, or to be doing something with video games, or be doing something with movies, or whatever. And, I wanted to be, and that's Ben. Like, in the very beginning, when he's, talking with Beverly, I could turn to Kathy and I'm like, yeah, that was me.
You listen to New Kids on the Block?
No, it wasn't New Kids on the Block. Even though my sister listened to New Kids on the Block. It was more contemporary Christian music, so.
Yeah, that is very embarrassing. You should have been ashamed.
I am ashamed. I am still ashamed. Well, and I think this is something that plays into a lot of the movie. You see the very blank adult figures in the movie, and I think this is something that plays into in the real world with something that we're seeing right now, which is I don't know if anybody's caught that Netflix series called Magic for Humans, which is a fantastic series. I mean, he's a great magician, and
Magic for Susans?
yes,
Phenomenal.
phenomenal, especially for Susan's.
Yes.
And I mean, it's really funny. It's a fantastic show. I do recommend that show, but something that people have been pulling from that is this kind of prank that he did of making adults believe that they've been turned invisible. Mm-hmm. And so they've been doing it with their children. And honestly, I feel like this is part of this, in that it is instilling this childhood fear and is breaching that trust where adults are supposed to be in this mode of protection of their children. And almost every single adult in the movie has breached that code of trust.
Yeah.
Like the one kid's mom is like basically doing this Munchausen thing
Eddie.
with Eddie, and that she's purposely keeping him away from these things and making him sick by this overprotection of him. And you have Beverly's father, who is just this child molester, and I equate this to this invisible prank that's been going around, because people are posting these online and people are like, "Oh no, it's just funny." No, it's not funny. It's child abuse. Mm-hmm. It is breaching that trust of being a parent, of being somebody who's going to protect their child. And children don't have the ability to think abstractly like adults do. That is something that you develop during adolescence. Trust me, I know this because I have my bachelor's degree in adolescent development, pretty much. Youth ministry is all about understanding teenagers and how the teenage brain develops. And this is very much, when you're a concrete thinker, and a lot of these kids are concrete thinkers, and this is the way that their fears will manifest. Mm-hmm. They'll manifest as getting sick, as all this other stuff. And especially in today's day and age, this is an anxiety that we are giving our children, is this anxiety that their parents have. And this is from millennials. And speaking as a millennial, this is something that was instilled into us from growing up with the advent of the internet, is that fear of not being seen, mm-hmm. of being invisible, that you're not going to have any impact on the world because you're just one of millions.
Why do you think everybody started a MySpace?
Exactly. Is that you wanted your top 8 friends. You wanted to be on somebody's top 8. Mm-hmm. Why everybody has a Facebook or Twitter, and like even people who like say they cut the cord and they're like, oh, yeah, I'm off the grid or whatever. They still want to be seen by people.
No, the reason why they're doing that is so they can be seen by people because they feel like they're not being seen if they're part of the grid. So if they're off the grid, they're more noticeable because people are like, hey, where are they?
Yeah, you're not on Facebook.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's a purposeful thing. And see, this is what I'm talking about with the invisibility prank. Is that it's that huge, kind of breach of trust. There is that huge kind of instilling within their kids this psychological torture, this anxiety, and for somebody who grew up with, I grew up and I developed a generalized anxiety disorder. I am afraid of pretty much everything,
Spiders included.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's always that low key kind of like always in the back of your head kind of fear. And it stems from the way that adults have treated me over the course of my life. And especially as an adult, when I became an adult, I was still treated as a child. Mm-hmm. And it's primarily because of the job that I chose. I chose as a youth minister. I chose to be a job where I worked with teenagers, worked with, people that are still kind of children, but are transitioning into this adult phase. And for me, that fear was always that, I would never be able to grow up. I would never be an adult. And I mean, that's still something that's within me now that I don't feel like an adult.
No, me neither.
Even though I now have a mortgage, I have a child, I'm married.
We have a dog.
We have a podcast.
Yep. We have real jobs with real 401ks.
Yeah. I am a middle-aged suburban dad, and I still feel like a child.
Yep. And I want to point out one of the problems I also have with the invisible prank is when you watch those videos, you can see those kids are terrified. Like, they're scared and they're upset. And this is not going to be something that they can just get over easily. And I actually have a family member who is really into pranking family members, including her kids. She thinks it's hilarious. I think it is ridiculous and it's stupid. Because it's not just like a one and done type of situation. Like, she goes out of her way to scare people. It's gotten to the point to where, like, when I see videos of her pranking her family members, they are almost like hardly non-responsive anymore because like she has like literally scared it out of them.
Yeah.
To where they don't have like a normal reaction to surprise anymore. Which is sad and it's troubling in itself because like they no longer have that like instinctive reaction. And she's even said like she's posted videos of like scaring her kids where they're like bawling and crying, and like another one of her kids is like, oh yeah, it's okay, it's just a prank. Clearly, like her kids are not enjoying this. Clearly, they're not.
Well, I think this is something that we can see primarily in it, is that, the way that, these kids kind of trying to band together to overcome these things that the adults are instilling in them, the fears that the adults are instilling in them. Mm-hmm. And, I'm really excited to kind of see where the director takes the second half of this, because it is I don't know if you've, again, spoiler alert, but seen the miniseries or read the book is when they're adults, is how they're interacting and how they encounter fear and the mundanity of life as an adult.
And then they're coming back to Derry.
Yeah. Which, these kids wouldn't be considered millennials. They would have been Gen Xers since this is now set in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So, not exactly, where we see it today. Mm-hmm. But, with millennials, I think we have been given a lot of these anxieties. And I'm speaking this from personal experience, is, I grew up afraid because this is something that is instilled in me was letting people down. Was this main thing is that I'm so afraid of failure, so afraid of letting even my like casual acquaintances down. that, it kind of cripples me from actually doing anything or actually trying or putting myself out there, putting myself at risk. And I think this is something that is as a societal construct, is a fear, and that was instilled in me by the adults in my life. And it wasn't necessarily my parents, but it was, like the people in my church and the people in my interactions with other adults in my life, is that, I know that they wanted the best for me, but they pushed me to the point where it was like I didn't, I was so afraid of letting anybody down. I was so afraid of failing that, I would even try beyond my own limits, that it hurt me. It was very, very much a detriment, to the point where now, like in my own imagination, I'm just paranoid almost all the time of letting people down. I'm afraid of being fired because, I make one mistake. And luckily I work at a place where mistakes are, commonplace and they're fixable.
Yeah.
And, it's all, but the thing is, it's all in my imagination. And, even now, I know there's nothing behind the curtain.
Stop
but it's
mentioning
still,
it, Miguel!
It's still, paranoia that there's somebody, watching us from behind the curtain.
It's okay, because Luke would have gotten them by now.
Yes.
And Luke's
or
just laying
would have
there.
just been licking them,
Yep.
Because he's not really a guard dog.
Nope. He'd be like, hey, want to be my friend? I enjoy getting my back scratched.
Wag, wag, wag.
Hello, my name is Luke. Do you have a treat? Oh, my gosh. So speaking about imagination, that's another key factor in this movie as well, too. Well, in the book and in the miniseries as well, is obviously imagination. One of there's actually a split theory. Half the internet thinks that the stuff that's going on is actually in the kids' imagination for the most part. Yes, Pennywise is there, but he's helping foster their imagination to get out of control. Whereas, which is why when they become not afraid of him anymore, he can't hurt them.
Yeah.
There's another faction there where because it's also the kids' imagination, that's why the parents don't see what's going on. And then there's another side that also says, no, it's really happening, but Pennywise is just making it to where the parents are either ignoring it or they don't realize what they are seeing. Or maybe...
Well, I think it's more that it's the desensitization, because they grew up in that town. Most of them are adults from that town, and that's what has turned them into these monsters in and of themselves.
How would you explain the Red Room then, with all the blood?
Well, and that's it doesn't faze him anymore, so it's not something. It doesn't look like it to him. Mm-hmm. To him, it's just it's the bathroom, because it's he grew up in that fear, and so now all of a sudden it's been
has it always
from
been
his
red?
mind. It's scrubbed from his mind. He doesn't see it.
Gotcha.
It's a mental block.
Gotcha. I like to think that it is part of the kid's imagination, and that Pennywise is helping to foster that imagination.
Yeah.
Maybe the kids didn't really clean up the whole bathroom full of blood. Maybe they just imagined the blood was there, and now the room is just clean. But anyway, imagination can be a very, very powerful thing. Imagination is a very important part of our human development, which is why there's been a lot of movements, especially recently, trying to bring back playtime into younger school-age kids' schooling, I guess.
Yeah.
The
education.
Yeah. So, for example, I remember growing up in elementary school, especially in kindergarten. I don't know about everybody else in the country, but we had different stations that we would kind of rotate to. So we would have a painting station, and we would have a dress-up station, and there was a reading station, which I don't think I could read at that point in time, so it was more just looking at books. But there was a block station, and you kind of know what I'm getting at. So there was different stations for different types of play, which kind of helped foster our imagination, because I remember sitting there and making up playtime at that. And I don't know if schools really do that anymore, allow kids to actually play and like learn through their imagination. So that's like the good part. Also, it's an easy escape too. So, heck, even if you're a writer and you write fiction, that in a way is fiction, right? Nonfiction. Nonfiction is real.
Yes.
Fiction is fake. I always get it mixed up. Sorry. I did not pay attention in library class at that point in time. But anyway, if you write fiction in a way, you are using your imagination. So it's an easy escape. Heck, when you're watching a movie, you imagine yourself in the movie sometimes. Like, how many of us on the drive home kind of like picture ourselves in the movie, or like, what would I do in that scenario, and kind of like build it up. And that's an adult form of imagination. I can't talk today. It's been a long time.
I mean, in reading books, and you build the entire world, as it were, in your imagination. I mean, even if you're an audiobook person rather than a physical words on a screen or on a paper, where that listening to it, it's still building the world in your imagination, because it's a description. It's not giving you the actual picture.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, doctors are always telling you, and teachers are telling you, to start reading to your kids at a really early age to kind of help build that kind of cognitive thinking and help build their imagination. When you're listening to audiobooks, you're essentially doing the same thing, but for adults. Anyway, I know there's a whole other camp out there who are like against audiobooks, hardcore. I don't see what the big deal is. Anyway, you're still reading. You're still getting what you want to get out of the book.
Yeah.
There's also kind of like a bad side to imagination. And this is kind of where we might get lost in the entertainment. For example, kind of like more on the bad side. It's not really that bad. But, for example, when a new Harry Potter book would come out, I would stay up for as long as I possibly could and try to read as much as I possibly could. Of course, the next day I would have school. I would come to school and like completely walk around like I was a living zombie. Chances are I didn't do my homework because I was too busy watching Harry Potter. And I mean, that's just one example of how like I dove into my imagination and I just forgot about the real world because I didn't want to deal with the real world. I didn't want to do homework. I wanted to be at Hogwarts with Harry, watching him do his homework. So, and that's for everything. Heck, video games. You are immersing yourself into that, and you kind of are imagining yourself being in part of that world too, and that can kind of get out of control. TV, movies, anything really. I guess board games if you're going to kind of stretch it some more. But anyway, another part of the bad sometimes is you can kind of get lost into what is good and what's kind of dangerous. So I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast or not. I've told it so many times that I've kind of forgotten where I've said it. But when I was, I would say either 4 or 5. I wasn't very, very old. I pretty much was like a free-range child. I would get up, I'd get my clothes on, feed myself breakfast, and I was outside all day long until my parents called me in for dinner. And that's pretty much how I lived my life growing up. I did have a lot of neighborhood kids, so I would play along with a lot of the neighborhood kids. But sometimes when I didn't have school, my neighbor, who I would hang out with most of the time because he was my same age, sometimes he would have school because he went to a private school where I went to public school. So on days like that, I was kind of left to my own devices, kind of wandering around the neighborhood. Anyway, so this one time I was walking down the street and I see that there's this white utility van. And the doors are right open in the back. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. Let me go check it out. This is a new thing that's not normally in my neighborhood. So I walk over there and I look into the utility van. There's no one inside. There's just a bunch of like power tools. Like it's, if you can imagine just like a general handyman's van, that's kind of what it looked like. There was cleaning supplies, but then there was also like regular tools, pretty much anything you can think of, really. So I walk in there and I see this broom and I'm like, oh, I'm Cinderella. Like immediately, like I'm Cinderella. I'm going to pretend that I'm Cinderella cleaning out the stranger's van. And I know a lot of you are probably like, what the heck? Like, why are you doing this? But I just kind of let my little imagination run with it. So we go day one, nothing eventful happens. I go back home. I come back, and the next day, and the van's still there. And I'm like, okay, Cinderella, take two. So I am Cinderella again. But this time, I think that the maintenance guy knew someone was in the van. Because I was a kid, I probably moved shit around all over the place. And so this time, I was playing Cinderella, and he pops his head in and he goes, "What are you doing?" It scared the bejesus out of me. Like, I ran out of there faster than I could possibly imagine. And I hid in my house for probably the next week because I was afraid that he was going to see me and tell my parents that I was hiding in his van. Luckily, this was not a dangerous man that I know of because he did let me escape. He could have easily shut the doors on me and I would have been gone forever. But instead, he scared me to the point to where I learned not to go into strangers' vans.
Yeah, you didn't even have to have free candy or anything. It's
No,
broom.
just a broom, and the door was open. Also, note to self: lock your van.
This is the reasons why I'm terrified for our child's future.
Anyway, so that's another bad side. You know, you could walk into a stranger's van and start playing Cinderella and could have been kidnapped. When I told my mom that story, like, she was like, "Are you serious?" But it's her fault. I wasn't being watched. Anyway. So there's also, like you were saying, there's also the ugly side to imagination. And that's kind of where you can get into the side where you start believing the falsehoods that you created in your mind as being 100% true. That's when you start getting a little bit more on the paranoid side, just due to your imagination. And part of it is not your fault. I mean, for you, for example, you have had past experiences to where you're like, A happens, then B happens. Mm-hmm. And it's been reinforced. It happens. You know, A happens, then B happens. But now you are having, since you're like, I guess, in the real world job, now when A happens, B doesn't happen. But because you've had A and B happen sequentially so much in your life, that when A does happen, I know, because you've told me you like have that fear of like, oh my God, I'm being fired. And I have to tell you, no, you're not being fired. Like, that's not how our company works. Like, yeah. You have to have like warnings and write-ups and all this other stuff in order for you to be fired first, unless you do something extremely against the rules, which I know you haven't. But that's just an example of, I guess it's not necessarily your imagination, because A and B in real life has happened so many times, but I guess that because of you experiencing that, you develop that paranoid imagination of A happens, so B is now going to happen. I hope that's not confusing people with me doing the A and B, but it's your own story, so I didn't want to tell people. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's kind of hard to get out of that. I guess that's kind of what manifests with us adults, because it's almost like we're ashamed sometimes to have that whimsical side of imagination. But it's so easy for us to slip into the ugly side of imagination and develop the paranoia. I mean, I get it too. There's times in my head where I'm like, oh, nobody knows that I'm here. You know, like if I could just get up and leave and nobody would know.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of it is due to the way that we as humans evolved is a lot of that, that, what do they call it? The reptile brain is that, you know, it's the flight or fight kind of thing, that mechanism that's in there. And that it really, we learned that fear is a good thing. Fear is a good thing that keeps us alive and keeps us able to, reproduce, to be able to move on and become, better as a species.
Yep, be aware of our surroundings so we can hide from the scary clown that's hiding behind the sheet.
Exactly. And so now that we're no longer, like scavenging for food, we're no longer hunting, we're no longer, at risk of bears eating us.
Like real life danger?
Or that we live in houses now or apartments or whatever, and we don't have to worry about bears getting into the house because bears can't get into the house.
Well, they sometimes can, but that's a whole nother story. There's plenty of bears in houses in Montana.
Yeah, but they're not going to go eat people in the house.
No.
They're going to just go in the kitchen and tear apart the fridge or whatever.
Yep, wander around and then leave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, it's the way that, and this is something that I've read before, that it gets passed on through DNA, is that those are things that, our children are born with, they're born with those fears because it allows them to be able to succeed as a future generation for that species.
Because you survived because you avoided the bears.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is something that like for each of these kids, this is something that a backstory that probably somebody's written in fan fiction somewhere. That their parents, they probably had some of these same fears, and there was a reason why they had these fears. And for me, I know that like my dad had issues with employment. He tried, like no matter how hard he tried, sometimes that it was still, he would still get let go, or there was downsizing and whatever was. And I think that's part of it was made worse for me by working in a place where I could be fired on a whim. Mm-hmm. And I think this is something that, imagination is part of that. Is I think part of that ingrained DNA primal fear thing.
Yeah, I agree. And it's hard to let go because it is like so ingrained in our DNA.
Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, let's talk about the ending.
So, the principle in the parable here, we talked about fear and we talked about imagination and how they both play into it and how they play into our own lives. And, so what we are working on now, next week we're going to be talking about Ozark. We are about a little bit more than halfway through the season. It's a pretty good season so far. I'm
shaking my head yes, everybody.
Yeah, we've got... We probably will be talking about different things than we did in season 1. But a lot of the same themes are being pulled through season 2. Mm-hmm. Some of the same threads are being pulled on. And I think that Jason Bateman does a fantastic job of writing and directing and acting in the show. So,
yep.
Other things that we're working on, we have seen the first episode of Castle Rock. We will work on that more after we watch... Ozark. We will be talking about Magicians season 2 soon. I believe that's going to be after Ozark.
I'm almost done with the whole book series, so probably.
And we've got a lot on our plates here. First Reformed, Hereditary, Solo, Won't You Be My Neighbor, Mr. Robot season 3, Mother. We've got a lot of stuff on our plates now. We're going to be watching a lot and talking about a lot. And again, we're going to be taking a break here in December, November-ish, and so we'll probably take a break for the holidays. And so you guys can go back and listen to some of our holiday movies from last year.
Yeah.
With all of those things that are on our plate and all of the things that we have done in the past, if you have anything to say about those episodes, or if you have anything that you would like us to watch or listen to or read or whatever, because we are the patron saints of pop culture, please let us know. You can find us on social media. We are on Facebook. We are on Reddit, both at Real Honest Faith. You can also, or Twitter rather than Reddit, you can also find us on Reddit. We are pretty much all over social media. You can find us on our website at thehonestfaith.com or send us an email at honestfaithconvos@gmail.com. You can also give us a call or give us a text message at 720-372-3879. And with all that being said, we invite you to come and join the conversation.
Bye.